Rich man forces black waitress to dance to humiliate her, but she stuns everyone and kicks him out with one final move. Harper Williams pressed her back against the cold marble wall of the ballroom's service corridor, her breath coming in short, controlled bursts. Through the crack in the door, she could see them, the elite of Chicago's North Shore, draped in designer gowns and $1,000 suits, their laughter floating above the crystal chandeliers like expensive perfume. She adjusted her black service uniform one more time, smoothing the crisp white apron that had become her armor over the past 3 years. At 32, Harper had perfected the art of invisibility. She moved through these gatherings like a shadow, clearing plates and refilling champagne flutes while remaining completely unseen. That's how she preferred it. That's how she survived. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the weight of unspoken tension pressed down on the grand ballroom of the Whitford estate like a storm waiting to break. "Harper, you ready?" Maya Rodriguez whispered, appearing beside her with a tray of dirty glasses. At 19, Maya was new to the catering staff, her dark eyes still wide with the shock of serving Chicago's wealthiest families. She hadn't yet learned to make herself invisible. "Always am," Harper murmured, though her stomach twisted with an uneasiness she couldn't name. She pushed through the service door, Maya close behind. The ballroom stretched before them like a golden cathedral. Hundreds of guests mingled beneath vaulted ceilings painted with cherubs and clouds, their voices creating a symphony of privilege and power. The annual Whitford Foundation Gala was the social event of the season, a chance for Chicago's elite to congratulate themselves on their charitable giving while writing off their donations. Harper moved with practiced efficiency, weaving between clusters of guests who spoke over her head as if she were furniture. She'd heard their conversations before, complaints about taxes, boasts about vacation homes, casual dismissals of the help. She'd grown immune to their casual cruelty, their unconscious assumption that her presence was temporary and forgettable. But as she approached the main dining area, carrying a tray of empty champagne flutes, she felt eyes on her. Not the brief, dismissive glances she was used to, but something more focused, more predatory. Lawrence Whitford stood at the center of a circle of admirers, his silver hair perfectly styled, his custom tuxedo fitting his tall frame like it had been painted on. At 55, he commanded attention the way some men commanded armies, through a combination of wealth, charm, and barely concealed menace. His real estate empire had built half of downtown Chicago, and his foundation had helped elect 3 mayors and 2 governors. He was also, Harper had learned from 3 years of serving his events, a man who enjoyed watching others squirm. "The problem with this city," Lawrence was saying, his voice carrying that particular tone of authority that comes from never being contradicted, "is that we've become too soft, too politically correct. We're afraid to call things what they are." The circle around him nodded and murmured agreement. Harper recognized most of them: city council members, federal judges, business leaders who appeared on the covers of Fortune and Forbes. They hung on Lawrence's every word like disciples waiting for scripture. Harper tried to move past them, but Lawrence's hand shot out, not quite touching her, but blocking her path. "Speaking of calling things what they are," he said, his pale blue eyes fixing on her with the intensity of a searchlight, "I think we need some entertainment." The conversation around them died. Harper felt the weight of dozens of stares, the sudden hush that falls over a crowd when they sense blood in the water. She kept her expression neutral, her mother's voice echoing in her head. "Don't give them the satisfaction, baby. Don't ever let them see you break." "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitford," Harper said, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart, "but I need to clear these tables for the next course." Lawrence's smile was sharp as a blade. "Oh, the tables can wait. Can't they, everyone?" He looked around the circle, and Harper saw heads nodding, saw the cruel anticipation in their eyes. "What we need is a little culture, a little authenticity." Maya appeared at Harper's elbow, her face pale with understanding. "Harper," she whispered, "let's just go back to the kitchen." But Lawrence wasn't finished. He raised his champagne glass and tapped it with a silver spoon, the crystal chime cutting through the ballroom like a bell. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. The entire room, more than 300 people, focused their attention on the small drama unfolding in their midst. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lawrence announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom, I think we're being a bit too formal tonight. Too stuffy. What do you say we liven things up? Harper felt the trap closing around her, felt the hungry anticipation of the crowd like heat radiating from a fire. She'd seen this before, different venues, different victims, but the same cruel entertainment. Lawrence Whitford was about to make her the star of his show. You, he said, pointing directly at Harper, his smile never wavering. Come here, darling. Harper's tray trembled slightly in her hands, the empty glasses singing a soft, discordant note. Around the room, she could see faces turning toward her, some with embarrassment, some with excitement, most with the detached curiosity of people watching a car accident. She had a choice. She could set down her tray, excuse herself, and walk away. She could preserve her dignity and her job by retreating to the kitchen and letting someone else deal with whatever humiliation Lawrence had planned. But as she looked into his pale, predatory eyes, something else stirred in her chest. Something that had been sleeping for too long. What exactly did you have in mind, Mr. Whitford? She asked, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent ballroom. Lawrence's grin widened. Oh, I think you know. Come on, don't be shy. Show us how your people dance. The words hung in the air like poison gas, spreading through the crowd in a wave of shocked silence. Harper felt 300 pairs of eyes boring into her, felt the weight of their judgment and anticipation pressing down like a physical force. Maya grabbed her arm. You don't have to, she whispered urgently. We can leave. We can. But Harper was already setting down her tray on a nearby table, her movements slow and deliberate. The crowd held its collective breath as she stepped forward, her chin raised, her dark eyes never leaving Lawrence's face. You want a show? She asked, and her voice carried something dangerous now, something that made Lawrence's smile falter just slightly. Then let's give them a show. The center of the ballroom seemed to expand around Harper as she walked toward it, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor like gunshots. The crowd parted before her, a sea of silk and diamonds creating a path to what felt like an execution ground. Lawrence followed, his confidence returning as he realized she was actually going through with it. That's the spirit, he called out, spreading his arms wide like a ringmaster introducing the main attraction. Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like we're about to get a real cultural education tonight. Harper reached the center of the dance floor, directly beneath the massive crystal chandelier that cast rainbow fragments across the marble. She turned to face Lawrence, who stood at the edge of the circle that had formed around them. The crowd pressed closer, their whispers creating a low hum of anticipation. Before we begin, Harper said, her voice cutting through the murmur, I want to make sure I understand what you're asking for, Mr. Whitford. Lawrence's eyebrows rose with mock surprise. Oh, it's quite simple, darling. Just dance. You know, he made an exaggerated movement with his shoulders, a crude mimicry that drew uncomfortable laughter from his immediate circle. Let's see some of that natural rhythm we've heard so much about. The cruelty of it was breathtaking in its casual brutality. Harper felt the familiar burn of shame trying to climb up her throat, the instinctive urge to shrink, to apologize, to disappear. Around the room, she could see faces, some twisted with anticipation, others looking away in embarrassment, a few showing genuine distress at what was unfolding. But then her eyes found Maya, who stood pressed against a pillar near the service entrance, tears streaming down her young face. Maya, who'd grown up in Pilsen, who worked 2 jobs to put herself through community college, who still believed that hard work and dignity would be enough to earn respect in this world. Maya needed to see what came next. Harper's grandmother had been a jazz singer in the 1940s, performing in clubs on Chicago's South Side when black entertainers weren't allowed to stay in the hotels where they performed. Her mother had been a dance instructor, teaching children in the community center during the day and cleaning offices at night to pay the bills. Both women had moved through a world that tried to reduce them to stereotypes, that demanded they perform their identity for others' entertainment. Both women had taught Harper something that Lawrence Whitford was about to learn the hard way. I want to make sure everyone understands what's happening here, Harper said, her voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. Mr. Whitford has asked me to dance for your entertainment. He's asked me to perform. How did you put it? The way my people dance. Lawrence's smile tightened. This wasn't going according to script. Well, No. Let me make sure I have this right, Harper continued, walking slowly around the perimeter of the circle that had formed. You want me to dance in a way that confirms your assumptions about who I am based on the color of my skin. You want me to perform a version of blackness that makes you comfortable, that gives you permission to feel superior while still being entertained. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Several people near the back began to edge toward the exits, sensing that whatever was about to happen, they didn't want to be witnesses to it. "You're overthinking this, darling," Lawrence said, but there was an edge to his voice now, a note of warning. "I just thought. You thought you could humiliate me," Harper said simply. "You thought you could turn me into a curiosity, a moment of cheap entertainment for your guests. You thought I would dance like a trained animal and be grateful for the attention." She stopped walking and faced him directly. The chandelier above them cast her shadow long across the marble floor, and in that shadow, Lawrence looked smaller somehow. "You know what, Mr. Whitford? I think you're absolutely right. I think your guests deserve some entertainment. I think they deserve to see exactly what kind of man you are." She gestured to the band, who had been watching the proceedings with barely concealed shock. "Could you play something with a good beat? Something lively?" The band leader, a middle-aged black man named Chester who'd been playing these events for over a decade, met her eyes across the room. In that look, Harper saw understanding, recognition, support. The first notes of "sing, sing, sing" filled the ballroom, the drums driving and insistent, the brass section building to a crescendo that made the chandelier above them tremble. Harper began to move. But this wasn't the degrading shuffle Lawrence had expected. This wasn't the crude stereotype he'd tried to force her into. Harper moved with the fluid grace of someone trained in classical ballet, the sharp precision of someone who understood jazz, and the earthy power of someone connected to traditions that stretched back through generations. She spun and leaped, her movements telling a story that had nothing to do with Lawrence's expectations and everything to do with excellence, dignity, and joy. Her dance was a master class in technique, a celebration of culture, and a fierce declaration of self-worth all rolled into one breathtaking performance. The crowd fell silent, then began to murmur appreciation. This wasn't what they'd expected either. This wasn't a sideshow or a moment of casual racism. This was art. Lawrence's face flushed red as he realized his trap had become Harper's stage. "That's enough," he said loudly, trying to break the spell she was weaving. "I think we've all seen." Harper stopped mid-movement and looked at him with pity. "Oh, Mr. Whitford," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the music. "Are you intimidated by a woman who refuses to be diminished?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the room, people who had been ready to watch her humiliation began to see something else entirely. Lawrence Whitford, exposed as a petty tyrant who'd finally met his match. Harper extended her hand toward him, a gesture both gracious and mocking. "Your turn," she said with a smile that was all sharp edges and sweet poison. "After all, you wanted to dance. So let's dance." Lawrence stared at her outstretched hand as if it were a serpent. The crowd held its breath. The music continued to play, building to another crescendo that seemed to demand a decision. He could walk away. He could end this confrontation and retreat to his circle of admirers. He could let Harper have her small victory and return to the comfortable assumption that money and power were enough to control any situation. Or he could step into the trap she'd laid for him. Pride, as Harper knew it would, made the choice for him. "Fine," Lawrence said, taking her hand with a grip meant to be crushing. "Let's dance." The moment his fingers touched hers, Harper knew she had him exactly where she wanted him. The music shifted as Chester read the room, the brassy swing of "sing, sing, sing" melting into something slower, more intimate, a sultry jazz standard that demanded partnership rather than performance. The change was subtle but devastating, transforming what Lawrence had intended as a public humiliation into something far more dangerous for him. A dance for two. Harper felt Lawrence's grip tighten on her hand, his palm already slightly damp with sweat despite his attempt to maintain his commanding presence. She could see the calculation in his pale eyes, the desperate attempt to figure out how to regain control of a situation that had slipped away from him like smoke. "Second thoughts, Mr. Whitford?" Harper asked quietly, her voice just loud enough for the closest spectators to hear. "We can always stop if you're not up for it." The taunt hit its mark. Lawrence's jaw clenched as he pulled her closer, his other hand finding the small of her back with the possessive pressure of someone used to taking whatever he wanted. "I never backed down from a challenge," he growled, trying to lead her into a basic foxtrot that would have been respectable if not impressive. But Harper had other plans. As the melody wrapped around them like silk, Harper began to move in ways that transformed their dance into something electric. She let Lawrence believe he was leading for exactly 3 beats, then began to weave movements that pulled him out of his comfort zone and into her world. Where Lawrence expected a simple sidestep, Harper added a fluid hip roll that drew appreciative murmurs from the crowd. Where he tried to spin her in a predictable turn, she transformed it into something that showcased her strength and flexibility, making him look clumsy by comparison. Every movement she made elevated the dance, while every attempt he made to control it exposed his limitations. The crowd pressed closer, their earlier discomfort transforming into genuine engagement. Harper could hear the whispers of appreciation, see the way people were pulling out their phones to record what was quickly becoming the most talked-about moment of the social season. "What the hell are you doing?" Lawrence hissed through his forced smile, his polished facade beginning to crack as sweat beaded on his forehead. "I'm dancing," Harper replied sweetly, executing a movement that required him to dip her backward while she maintained perfect control and grace. As she rose, her dark eyes locked onto his with unmistakable challenge. "Isn't this what you wanted? A show?" Lawrence's breathing became labored as Harper continued to lead him through increasingly complex movements. His expensive shoes, designed for boardroom power plays rather than dance floors, began to slip on the polished marble. His carefully styled hair started to lose its perfection, and dark patches of perspiration began to show through his custom tuxedo. Meanwhile, Harper moved as if the music flowed through her veins. Every step was precise, every turn was poetry, every gesture was a masterclass in how true power presented itself. She wasn't just dancing with Lawrence. She was conducting a symphony of his humiliation while making it look effortless. "You know," Harper said as she guided him through a particularly challenging sequence that left him stumbling slightly. "My grandmother used to tell me that dancing was the most honest thing 2 people could do together. She said you couldn't hide who you really were on a dance floor." Lawrence's face flushed deeper red as he struggled to keep up with her movements. Around them, the crowd had grown silent with fascination, watching a masterclass in grace under pressure play out in real time. "She sounds like a wise woman," came a voice from the crowd. Harper glanced over to see Margaret Chun, one of Chicago's most prominent federal judges, watching with obvious appreciation. "I'd love to have met her. She would have liked you, Your Honor," Harper replied without missing a beat, spinning Lawrence in a movement that left him momentarily disoriented. She had excellent taste in people. The exchange was brief but devastating. In those few seconds, Harper had demonstrated her ability to maintain a conversation with one of the most powerful people in the room, while Lawrence could barely keep his footing. The contrast was stark and humiliating. "That's enough," Lawrence panted, trying to pull away from her. "I think we've entertained everyone sufficiently." But Harper's grip on his hand was iron-strong now, her smile brilliant and merciless. "Oh, but we're just getting to the good part, Mr. Whitford. Surely a man of your stamina can handle one complete song." The crowd murmured approval and encouragement. Someone called out, "Come on, Lawrence, show us what you've got." Others began to clap in rhythm with the music. What had started as his attempt to demean Harper had become a public performance review of his own capabilities. And he was failing spectacularly. Harper began to incorporate elements that showcased just how outclassed he was. Movements that required strength, timing, and trust. She lifted herself in ways that forced him to support her weight while maintaining the appearance that he was the one in control. She spun away from him and returned in patterns that demanded he anticipate her movements and respond accordingly. Lawrence, sweating profusely now and breathing hard, was reduced to simply trying to avoid looking completely foolish. His earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the desperate concentration of a man drowning in public. "You're quite the dancer, Mr. Whitford," Harper said as she guided him through a series of steps that had him moving backward toward the edge of the dance floor, where several waiters were setting up for the next course. "Though I have to say, you seem a little out of breath." "I'm fine," Lawrence gasped, but his words were punctuated by his labored breathing. Sweat had begun to drip from his forehead, and his perfect hair now hung in damp strands across his face. Harper smiled with predatory sweetness. Oh good, because I was thinking we might try something a little more energetic. As the music built toward its climax, Harper began to execute the final phase of her plan. She spun away from Lawrence with such sudden force that he stumbled forward, off balance and desperate to maintain any semblance of dignity. Behind him, Maya and another waiter were setting up a drink station, arranging glasses of champagne on silver trays for the dinner service. The setup was elaborate and expensive, with crystal glasses arranged in precise geometric patterns that caught and reflected the light from the chandelier above. Lawrence, focused entirely on not falling flat on his face, never saw it coming. Harper's final move was a masterpiece of timing and precision. She spun toward him with such grace and speed that he instinctively reached out to catch her, his body overcompensating for the momentum he couldn't control. His expensive Italian leather shoes, slick with his own nervous sweat, lost their grip on the marble floor. Lawrence Whitford, master of Chicago real estate and self-appointed judge of other people's worth, crashed backward into the drink station with all the grace of a falling tree. Crystal shattered. Champagne exploded in golden arcs. Silver trays crashed to the floor with sounds like thunder. And in the center of it all, Harper Williams stood poised and perfect, not a hair out of place, watching the most powerful man in the room sit in a puddle of his own making. The ballroom fell completely silent. Then, slowly, Harper began to clap. The silence that followed the crash seemed to last forever, though it was probably no more than 3 or 4 heartbeats. Lawrence sat in a spreading pool of champagne and sparkling water, crystal shards glinting around him like diamonds, his custom tuxedo soaked through and his carefully cultivated image in ruins. Harper stood at the edge of the destruction, her hands coming together in slow, deliberate applause that echoed through the ballroom like gunshots. Her expression was serene, almost gentle, as if she were appreciating a particularly moving performance at the symphony. "Bravo, Mr. Whitford," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. That was quite the finale. The crowd remained frozen, unsure how to process what they had just witnessed. This wasn't supposed to happen. In their world, people like Lawrence Whitford didn't end up on the floor covered in alcohol and humiliation. People like Harper Williams didn't win. But here they were, watching the impossible play out in front of them. Lawrence struggled to his feet, champagne dripping from his hair and his once perfect tuxedo clinging to his body like wet cardboard. His face had gone beyond red into a dangerous purple that suggested his blood pressure was reaching crisis levels. He began, his voice strangled with rage and embarrassment. "You did that on purpose." "You did what exactly?" Harper asked innocently, tilting her head with curiosity that was as sharp as a blade. "Dance with you? At your invitation? In front of your guests?" She gestured to the crowd, which was beginning to stir like an audience coming out of a trance. "Everyone saw what happened, Mr. Whitford. You insisted on dancing, and well, I did my best to keep up with you." The lie was so perfectly constructed, so beautifully delivered, that several people in the crowd began to nod unconsciously. From their perspective, Harper had simply been an exceptionally graceful dance partner, while Lawrence had proven unable to match her skill level. "That's not," Lawrence started, then stopped as he realized the trap Harper had constructed around him. To accuse her of deliberately causing his fall would be to admit that he, a man who prided himself on control and dominance, had been outmaneuvered by a waitress. To accept her version of events meant accepting that he was simply incompetent. Either way, he lost. Maya approached with a towel, her young face struggling between professional concern and barely suppressed delight. "Mr. Whitford, are you injured? Should I call for medical assistance?" Lawrence snatched the towel from her hands with such violence that Maya stepped back instinctively. "I don't need help from the help," he snarled, the careful veneer of civilized behavior finally cracking completely. The words hung in the air like a confession, revealing the ugly truth that everyone had been pretending not to see. This wasn't about dancing or entertainment. This had always been about power, about putting people he considered beneath him in their place. Judge Chin stepped forward, her expression cold with disgust. "Lawrence," she said quietly, "I think perhaps you should go clean yourself up." It wasn't a suggestion. Coming from Margaret Chun, it was a command delivered with all the authority of the federal bench. Other powerful figures in the crowd began to nod agreement, their earlier amusement curdling into embarrassment at being associated with such a public display of cruelty. Lawrence looked around the room, seeing his social standing evaporate in real time. These people, his peers and allies, were already beginning to distance themselves from him. He could see it in their averted gazes, their subtle steps away from him, their whispered conversations. "This isn't over," he said to Harper, his voice low and venomous. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Harper looked at him for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was sad rather than triumphant. "Mr. Whitford," she said gently, "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. The question is, do you?" She gestured to the crowd around them, to the phones that had captured his fall, to the faces that now looked at him with pity or disgust rather than respect. "You could have been a decent human being tonight," Harper continued. "You could have let me do my job, serve your guests, and go home to my daughter with my dignity intact. Instead, you decided to turn me into entertainment. You decided that humiliating me would make you feel powerful." She stepped closer to him, close enough that only he could hear her next words. "But here's what you didn't understand, Mr. Whitford. You can't humiliate someone who knows their own worth. You can't break someone who's already survived everything you could do to them. And you can't win a game when you don't even understand the rules." Lawrence opened his mouth to respond, but Harper was already turning away from him, dismissing him as completely as he had tried to dismiss her. She walked to where Maya stood with the other staff members, all of whom were watching with expressions of awe and terror at what they had just witnessed. "Maya," Harper said gently, "would you help me clean up this mess? We still have a dinner service to complete." The simple request, the immediate return to work and dignity, was perhaps the most devastating blow of all. While Lawrence stood dripping and raging, Harper was already moving on, treating his destruction as nothing more than a spill to be cleaned up. The crowd began to disperse, their conversations buzzing with excitement and shock. Harper could hear fragments of commentary as people processed what they had seen. "Did you see the way she moved? Incredible grace under pressure. Lawrence really showed his true colors, didn't he? Someone's going to have a conversation with him about appropriate behavior." Judge Chin approached Harper as she began to gather the larger pieces of crystal. "Miss Williams," she said quietly, "that was extraordinary." Harper looked up from her work, surprised. In 3 years of working these events, none of the guests had ever addressed her by name. "Thank you, Your Honor. I'm sorry you had to witness such an unpleasant scene." "Don't apologize," Margaret said firmly. "You have nothing to apologize for. In fact," she paused, seeming to make a decision, "I may have an opportunity that would interest you. Would you be willing to speak with me sometime this week?" Harper blinked, uncertain. Of course, Your Honor. Though I should mention that I'm not sure how much longer I'll be working for this catering company." Margaret smiled, the expression transforming her stern judicial face into something warmer. "Oh, I don't think you need to worry about that. Something tells me your opportunities are about to expand significantly." As she walked away, Harper felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Chester, the band leader, grinning at her with pure admiration. "Girl," he said, shaking his head in wonder, "I've been playing these rich folks' parties for 20 years, and I have never seen anything like that. Your grandmother would be proud." Harper felt tears prick at her eyes for the first time that evening. "You think so?" "I know so," Chester said firmly. "That wasn't just dancing. That was justice set to music." As Harper continued cleaning up the remnants of Lawrence's humiliation, she noticed that Lawrence himself had finally left the ballroom, slinking away like a wounded animal. But the energy in the room had shifted completely. The staff moved with more confidence, the guests seemed more aware of their presence, and there was a sense that something important had changed. Maya appeared beside her with a mop and bucket, her eyes shining with something Harper had never seen before: hope. "Harper," she whispered, "was that real? Did we really just see Lawrence Whitford get exactly what he deserved?" Harper smiled, remembering her grandmother's words about justice being patient but inevitable. "Sometimes, Maya, the universe decides it's time to balance the scales. And sometimes, it lets us help." But even as she said it, Harper knew this was only the beginning. Men like Lawrence Whitford didn't simply disappear after one public humiliation. If anything, this would make him more dangerous, more determined to reassert his power. The real test would come when he tried to strike back. 3 days after the Whitford Foundation Gala, Harper sat in her small kitchen, cradling a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The morning sun streamed through her apartment window, illuminating the stack of newspapers spread across her table, all featuring variations of the same headline: Socialite's dance disaster goes viral. The video was everywhere. Someone at the gala had uploaded the footage to social media, and within 24 hours, it had exploded across every platform imaginable. Hashtag DanceOffDisaster was trending on Twitter. Instagram was flooded with reaction videos. Even the local news stations had picked up the story, though they were careful to avoid mentioning Lawrence by name, referring to him only as a prominent Chicago businessman. Harper's phone buzzed constantly with friend requests, interview offers, and job opportunities. 3 different talent agencies had reached out about representation. A morning talk show wanted to fly her to New York. Someone from Ellen's show had called twice. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane, knowing the worst was yet to come. "Mama, why are there people with cameras outside?" Harper looked up to see her daughter Zoe standing in the doorway, still in her pajamas, her 8-year-old face creased with worry. Zoe had her father's light brown eyes and Harper's stubborn chin, and right now both were focused on her mother with the intensity of someone far older than her years. "Just some reporters, baby," Harper said, pulling Zoe onto her lap and smoothing her daughter's unruly curls. "They want to talk about something that happened at work the other night." Zoe studied her mother's face with the uncomfortable perception that children often possess. "Are you in trouble?" Harper was saved from answering by a sharp knock at her apartment door. Through the peephole, she could see a woman in an expensive suit flanked by 2 men in dark clothing who had the unmistakable bearing of private security. "Ms. Williams?" the woman called through the door. "My name is Patricia Morrison. I represent the Whitford organization. Mr. Whitford would very much like to speak with you." Harper's blood turned to ice. She gestured for Zoe to go to her room, mouthing "Stay quiet," as her daughter reluctantly obeyed. Then she opened the door, keeping the chain lock engaged. Patricia Morrison was exactly what Harper had expected: mid-40s, perfectly groomed, with the kind of predatory smile that came from years of practicing corporate law. Her companions looked like they could bench press a small car. "Ms. Williams," Patricia said smoothly, "I hope you don't mind the early visit. Mr. Whitford is very eager to resolve the misunderstanding from the other evening." "What kind of resolution did he have in mind?" Harper asked, her voice carefully neutral. Patricia's smile widened. "Mr. Whitford is prepared to be very generous. A settlement that would ensure your financial security for years to come. All you need to do is sign a simple agreement acknowledging that the events at the gala were an unfortunate accident, and that you bear no ill will toward Mr. Whitford or his organization." Harper almost laughed. "A non-disclosure agreement. Among other things, yes. Mr. Whitford values his privacy, as I'm sure you understand. The viral nature of this incident has been quite distressing for him." Through the crack in the door, Harper could see one of Patricia's companions casually examining the lock on her front door. The message was subtle but clear: "We know where you live. We know how to get in. And if I refuse?" Patricia's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Well, that would be unfortunate. Mr. Whitford has many friends in this city. Friends in business, in government, in the service industry. It would be a shame if those friendships complicated your employment prospects." The threat was delivered with such casual politeness that it took Harper a moment to process the full implications. Lawrence Whitford wasn't just offering her money to stay quiet. He was promising to destroy her life if she refused. "I need time to think about it," Harper said. "Of course, but please don't take too much time. Mr. Whitford is not a patient man, and this situation is causing him considerable stress. We wouldn't want that stress to affect his judgment regarding future actions." After they left, Harper sat on her couch with her head in her hands, trying to process what had just happened. She'd humiliated Lawrence Whitford in front of Chicago's elite, and now he was making it clear that he had the power to make her life impossible. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but Harper recognized the voice immediately. "Ms. Williams? This is Judge Chun. I hope you don't mind me calling so early, but I wanted to follow up on our conversation from the other night." "Judge Chun," Harper said, relief flooding through her voice. Yes, I'd still very much like to speak with you." "Excellent. Are you free this morning? There's something I'd like to discuss with you, and I think it might be time-sensitive given recent developments. An hour later, Harper sat in Margaret Chen's chambers, a space that radiated authority and intelligence. Law books lined the walls, and certificates and awards created a testament to decades of distinguished service. Judge Chen sat behind her desk, but her posture was warm rather than intimidating. I assume you've heard from Lawrence's people this morning, Margaret said without preamble. Harper's eyes widened. How did you? Because I know Lawrence Whitford, Margaret said grimly. I've been watching him operate in this city for 15 years, and his playbook never changes. First comes the humiliation, which you turned back on him beautifully, I might add. Then comes the bribe disguised as a settlement. When that fails, comes the retaliation. Harper felt her stomach clench. What kind of retaliation? The kind that destroys careers, ruins reputations, and makes people disappear from polite society, Margaret said bluntly. Lawrence doesn't just have money, Ms. Williams. He has a network of people who owe him favors, who depend on his goodwill, who are terrified of crossing him. He's ended careers with a phone call and bankrupted businesses with a whisper in the right ear. The judge leaned forward, her expression serious. But here's what Lawrence doesn't understand about power. Real power comes from doing what's right, even when it's difficult. And what you did the other night, that wasn't just entertainment. That was a masterclass in dignity under fire. Harper felt tears threatening. Judge Chun, I appreciate what you're saying, but I have a daughter. I can't afford to fight someone like Lawrence Whitford. I don't have his resources, his connections. Actually, Margaret interrupted with a slight smile, you might be surprised what resources you do have. She opened a file on her desk and spread out several documents. Ms. Williams, what do you know about the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice? Harper blinked. Not much, honestly. They're very interested in cases involving workplace discrimination and harassment, particularly cases where powerful individuals use their influence to create hostile work environments for people of color. Margaret's smile grew more pronounced. And they're especially interested in cases that have clear video evidence and multiple witnesses. Harper stared at the documents, trying to process what she was hearing. You're saying I could file a lawsuit against Lawrence Whitford? I'm saying you could do more than that. The DOJ is building a pattern case against several prominent figures who've been using their wealth and influence to harass and intimidate workers. Your case could be the centerpiece that brings down a network of powerful men who think they're untouchable. The weight of the possibility settled over Harper like a heavy blanket. But the risk is significant, Margaret agreed. Lawrence will fight back with everything he has. He'll try to destroy your reputation, your employment prospects, your personal relationships. He'll dig into every aspect of your life looking for something to use against you. She leaned back in her chair, studying Harper carefully. But here's what I saw the other night that Lawrence missed. You're not someone who can be broken by bullying. You're someone who gets stronger when pushed. And right now, you have something he can never buy or intimidate away from you. What's that? The moral high ground. And in a fight like this, that's worth more than all the money in the world. Harper was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Zoe, about the reporters outside her apartment, about Patricia Morrison's casual threats. Then she thought about Maya's tear-streaked face, about all the other service workers who'd endured Lawrence's cruelty in silence, about her grandmother's voice telling her that some fights were worth having regardless of the cost. If I do this, Harper said slowly, what happens next? Margaret's smile was fierce and proud. Next, Ms. Williams, we teach Lawrence Whitford and men like him that their money can't buy them permission to treat people like disposable entertainment. She handed Harper a business card. This is the direct number for Assistant Attorney General Sarah Martinez. She's been waiting for a case like yours for months. When you call her, and I very much hope you will, tell her Judge Chun recommended you speak. Harper took the card, her hand trembling slightly. And if Lawrence escalates before then we document everything. Every threat, every attempt at intimidation, every effort to interfere with your employment or your life. Because harassment in response to filing a discrimination complaint is a federal crime, and Lawrence Whitford is about to learn that some people can't be bought, threatened, or silenced. As Harper left the courthouse, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, hope mixed with determination. The scared woman who'd pressed her back against the service corridor wall 3 days ago was gone, replaced by someone who understood that running away from bullies only encouraged them to find new victims. But first, she had to get home to Zoe and figure out how to explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes doing the right thing meant stepping into the storm instead of seeking shelter from it. As she walked to her car, Harper's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "You have 24 hours to accept Mr. Whitford's generous offer. After that, the offer expires and other options become necessary. Choose wisely." Harper looked at the message for a long moment, then deleted it and dialed the number on Sarah Martinez's card. It was time to stop running. 2 weeks later, Harper stood outside the federal building in downtown Chicago, surrounded by a crowd of reporters and cameras that made the circus outside her apartment look like a children's birthday party. Assistant Attorney General Sarah Martinez stood beside her, a fierce woman in her 40s whose reputation for taking down powerful predators had made her a legend in legal circles. Behind them, the imposing facade of the courthouse rose like a monument to justice, its marble columns and bronze doors promising that inside, power would be held accountable to principle. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind of depositions, document reviews, and strategy sessions. Sarah's team had moved with devastating efficiency, uncovering a pattern of behavior that stretched back years. Lawrence Whitford, it turned out, had a long history of using his wealth and influence to humiliate and harass service workers, particularly women of color. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage from dozens of events showing Lawrence's crude entertainment at others' expense. Financial records showing payments to silence victims. Witness statements from staff members who'd been too afraid to speak up until Harper's courage had given them permission to tell their own stories. But Lawrence hadn't gone quietly. True to Judge Chen's predictions, he'd unleashed every weapon in his considerable arsenal. Harper had lost her job with the catering company within days of refusing his settlement offer. Her landlord had suddenly discovered violations that required expensive repairs. Her car had been vandalized twice. Anonymous letters had been sent to Zoe's school questioning Harper's fitness as a parent. Each attack had only strengthened Harper's resolve and added more evidence to the federal case building against him. "Ms. Williams," called out a reporter from Channel 7. "How does it feel to be taking on one of Chicago's most powerful men?" Harper looked directly into the camera, her voice steady and clear. "This was never about taking on Lawrence Whitford specifically. This is about standing up to a system that protects powerful people who think their wealth gives them permission to treat others as less than human." "But weren't you concerned about the personal cost?" another reporter asked. "Mr. Whitford's attorneys have made it clear they intend to fight these charges aggressively." Harper's smile was serene but unshakable. "My grandmother used to tell me that doing the right thing isn't supposed to be easy. If it were easy, everyone would do it. The cost of staying silent, to me, to my daughter, and to every other person who might be Lawrence Whitford's next victim, was far higher than any price I might pay for speaking up." Sarah Martinez stepped forward. "What Ms. Williams isn't mentioning is that her courage has opened the floodgates. We've received over 200 additional complaints about Mr. Whitford's behavior, spanning more than a decade. This case has become about much more than one incident at one gala." As if summoned by her words, a convoy of black cars pulled up to the courthouse steps. Lawrence Whitford emerged from the lead vehicle, surrounded by a phalanx of attorneys and security personnel. Even at a distance, Harper could see that the past 2 weeks had taken their toll. His usually perfect appearance was slightly disheveled, his face drawn and haggard. The crowd of reporters surged toward him like a wave, shouting questions and thrusting microphones in his direction. Lawrence's lead attorney, a sharp-faced man named Davidson, tried to push through the crowd while Lawrence himself kept his head down and his mouth shut. But as they climbed the courthouse steps, Lawrence looked up and his eyes found Harper's across the sea of cameras and journalists. For a moment, time seemed suspended as predator and prey took each other's measure one final time. Harper saw fear in his pale blue eyes, fear of exposure, fear of consequences, fear of a world where his money and influence couldn't protect him from the results of his own actions. But she also saw rage, the fury of a man who couldn't accept that someone he considered beneath him had dared to challenge his authority. Harper looked back at him with something far more dangerous than anger, pity mixed with absolute certainty. She had already won this fight, regardless of what happened in the courtroom. She had proven to herself, to her daughter, and to the world that dignity could not be bought or sold, that self-respect was not negotiable, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was refuse to be diminished. Lawrence seemed to understand what he saw in her expression, because his face flushed with the same dangerous color it had taken on the night of the gala. He started to step toward her, his attorney's restraining hand barely holding him back. "You think you've won," he called out, his voice carrying over the crowd. "You think this changes anything. But I'll destroy you. I'll destroy everything you care about. By the time I'm finished with you." "Mr. Whitford," Sarah Martinez's voice cut through his tirade like a blade. "I would strongly advise you to stop talking. Threatening a federal witness in front of dozens of cameras is probably not in your best interest." Lawrence's attorney grabbed his arm and physically pulled him toward the courthouse entrance, whispering urgent warnings that Harper couldn't hear but could easily imagine. As the crowd began to disperse, Harper felt a small hand slip into hers. She looked down to see Maya, who had driven up from the south side to be here for the arraignment. "Are you scared?" Maya asked quietly. Harper squeezed her young friend's hand. "Terrified," she admitted. "But not of him. I'm scared of what happens if people like Lawrence Whitford are allowed to keep treating people like us as their personal entertainment. I'm scared of the world my daughter will grow up in if we don't stand up now." Inside the courthouse, the proceedings were swift and efficient. Lawrence Whitford was formally charged with multiple counts of harassment, intimidation, and civil rights violations. His attorneys entered a plea of not guilty and immediately requested bail, which was granted at $2 million, pocket change for a man of Lawrence's wealth. But as Harper sat in the courtroom gallery watching Lawrence's processing, she noticed something that gave her deep satisfaction. The man who had commanded every room he entered, who had bent Chicago's elite to his will through sheer force of personality and wealth, looked small and diminished in the formal setting of federal court. Here, his money mattered less than the evidence. His connections carried no weight against sworn testimony. His threats were meaningless in the face of constitutional protections. Judge Chun had been right. Real power came from doing what was right, even when it was difficult. After the arraignment, Harper found herself on the courthouse steps again, this time with a much smaller crowd of reporters. The circus atmosphere had given way to something more serious, more respectful. "Ms. Williams," called out Carmen Rodriguez from the Tribune. "What's next for you?" Harper smiled, thinking about the offers that had been pouring in since her story went viral. Not just from talent agents and talk shows, but from civil rights organizations, from law firms specializing in discrimination cases, from nonprofits dedicated to empowering women and communities of color. "I'm going back to work," she said simply. "Judge Chun has offered me a position with her chambers, and I've accepted. I'll be starting law school part-time in the fall." She paused, looking out over the city that had watched her transformation from invisible waitress to federal witness. "But mostly, I'm going home to my daughter to tell her that sometimes, when you stand up to bullies, you discover that you're not as powerless as they wanted you to believe. And sometimes, when you refuse to let someone make you smaller, you end up becoming something larger than you ever imagined possible." As Harper walked down the courthouse steps toward her new life, she could swear she heard music in the distance, something jazzy and triumphant, with a rhythm that made her want to dance. Behind her, Lawrence Whitford sat in the back of his limousine, staring at his phone as stock prices for his company continued to plummet and business partners distanced themselves from the scandal. His empire, built on intimidation and the assumption that wealth made him untouchable, was crumbling around him. He had asked Harper to dance, never imagining that she would choose the music. But Harper Williams was already thinking about her next dance, this time, in a courtroom, to a song of justice that had been waiting 300 years to be played. The real show was just beginning. If you made it to the end, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. It truly means the world to us. See you in the next one.